In a world where cancel culture is rampant and sensitive topics are hidden behind trigger warnings, one man is stepping up and speaking the truth, no matter the cost. Dr. Phil is known for his straight talk, but this time, he's not just holding back, he's completely dismantling the woke culture that's taking over society. With his razor-sharp commentary and fearless takedowns, he exposes the flaws in today's culture of avoidance and sensitivity. This isn't just an opinion, it's a wake-up call.
And, I get hate mail for saying I love this country. But I do. I love this country. I stand up when the flag goes by. I put my hand over my heart when they play the national anthem. And I love this country enough to acknowledge that we've got problems.
Right.
I'm not so defensive about it.
According to Dr. Phil, genuine love for a country involves looking at its imperfections head on and understanding that acknowledging those imperfections is the first step toward fixing them. He makes it clear that it's okay to admit we have problems. In fact, it's essential.
I love it enough to not be defensive about the fact that we got problems.
Big problems.
And I think that's a good thing to
Yes.
say, I admit we got problems. I don't have to be defensive about that. Sure we do. And I see things like trigger warnings.
In an age where political correctness often trumps open discussion, it's refreshing to hear someone speak out honestly, even at the risk of backlash. The ability to speak freely about issues in society without being immediately branded as unpatriotic or anti-American is the hallmark of a thriving, open society.
The majority of universities, my research has shown me that the majority of universities have utilized or are utilizing trigger warnings. I saw a couple of universities that are using trigger warnings for Romeo and Juliet, where they say, trigger warning, suicide content.
Dr. Phil raises a crucial point. Universities today have become hubs of safe spaces where students are shielded from uncomfortable ideas and even challenging content. Trigger warnings, warnings issued before content that may be disturbing or stressful, are one of the most prominent examples of this. On the surface, it sounds good, right? After all, colleges are places where students should feel safe and supported, but Dr. Phil delves deeper into the implications of this approach, especially when it comes to the effectiveness of trigger warnings. The data is unequivocal. Trigger warnings do not achieve the goals they were intended to.
Well, spoiler alert. Come on. Kind of gave the storyline away. But here's my problem. When you research trigger warnings, and please, if you're listening to this, fact check me. Please fact check me. Don't go to Google, go to Scholastic Google.
Research shows that rather than alleviating anxiety or stress, trigger warnings can actually worsen it. Instead of allowing individuals to confront uncomfortable topics, they give them an excuse to avoid them altogether. This avoidance, Dr. Phil explains, isn't preparing students for the real world. Life is full of difficult and often stressful situations that can't be avoided by simply walking away or hiding from them. The real challenge lies in learning how to face these situations, deal with the discomfort, and build resilience.
I mean, go another level and research trigger warnings, and you will find that the vast majority, overwhelming body of literature says trigger warnings not only don't work,
Make you weaker.
they actually make you anxious.
For instance, when universities place trigger warnings on classic works like Romeo and Juliet for themes like suicide or violence, it undermines the educational purpose of these texts. Students may be warned of something they need to process and understand, but they're not given the tools to handle it.
They actually
Wow.
create the problem that they were designed to avoid.
The idea of a trigger warning is like a temporary shield, offering comfort in the moment, but no preparation for how to deal with life's true challenges. Dr. Phil argues that trigger warnings not only fail to protect students from discomfort, but they also create a culture of anxiety and avoidance.
There is evidence-based therapy designed to teach people to cope with things that stress them out, right? Systematic desensitization, dialectical behavior therapy. There are a number of evidence-based therapies to teach people to overcome these stressors in their life.
So what's the alternative? Dr. Phil suggests a far more productive solution, evidence-based therapies. Unlike trigger warnings, therapies like systematic desensitization and dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, actually help people build the resilience they need to cope with stress. These therapies are grounded in research and are designed to help individuals face their fears, not run away from them. Take systematic desensitization as an example. This method helps individuals gradually confront their anxieties in a controlled and structured way, starting with less threatening situations and working up to more intense challenges.
Why? Because you can't avoid them. So what do trigger warnings do? They say, okay, some things are going to come up that might stress you, so we're going to warn you, which is stressful, and you can go over here and sit in a corner and avoid this and pretend it's not there. Problem is, when you get out of college and get out in the real world, that doesn't happen.
The key here is exposure, not avoidance. Over time, individuals learn that they can face things that make them anxious, and that these things don't have the power to destroy them. This approach, unlike trigger warnings, teaches students how to manage their emotions, deal with distressing content, and grow from it.
Well, it's starting to.
Well, sadly.
Yeah.
But that pendulum is swinging back.
Yes.
So you're not preparing people for the real world. These trigger warnings don't work.
DBT, on the other hand, provides tools for emotional regulation, helping people learn to tolerate stress and distress without turning to avoidance. These therapies don't promise an easy road, but they provide concrete ways to build inner strength. In contrast, trigger warnings, while well-intentioned, do nothing to teach coping strategies. Instead, they teach people to shy away from discomfort, a lesson that does not serve them well once they leave the bubble of academia.
Research says they actually hurt, and that the better method is to learn to cope with them, so later in life you're not still paralyzed, whether it's PTSD or whatever it may be. You can have them. And the trigger warnings have been for some really ridiculous things, but assuming that they're for something that was traumatic, you need to learn to cope with that.
Dr. Phil argues that universities, in their pursuit of creating safe spaces, are actually doing a disservice to their students. The real world doesn't come with trigger warnings. In fact, the world will throw challenges at you whether you're ready or not. By failing to prepare students to cope with these challenges, universities are not equipping them with the skills necessary for adulthood. Instead, they're setting them up for failure. The true strength of an education isn't in how much it shields you from the world, but in how well it prepares you to engage with it.
These universities that are employing them have the same access to the same research that I do. So if I can go out there and find out that trigger warnings are contraindicated, that you should not use them, that they actually create problems, they don't help anything, they actually create problems. If I can look that up and find it, so can every university that's employing them. So why are they doing it anyway?
Dr. Phil goes a step further, questioning why universities continue to implement trigger warnings despite overwhelming evidence that they don't work. He argues that universities have access to the same research and studies that he does, so they are fully aware of the drawbacks of trigger warnings. Yet, they persist in using them. Why? According to Dr. Phil, it's because of virtue signaling. Universities, in their desire to appear socially progressive and sensitive to students' needs, choose the path of least resistance. They implement policies that sound good, even when they're not effective. Their opinions are not just challenged, they're completely disregarded. This is where society is headed, according to Dr. Phil. We are moving towards a world where certain viewpoints are no longer allowed, and anyone who expresses them is punished. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest stories shaking entertainment, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.